Welcome to Episode 2 of Renewing the Conversation, a series of interviews where we talk to leading industry professionals and experts about renewable energy and heating, with a focus on the home and what challenges face the industry and homeowners.
Today we welcome Graham Hendra, the founder of Freedom Heat Pumps, who has a real passion for renewable heating. We have a good laugh with Graham in this interview and get stuck into a candid conversation about the reputation of the industry, and he makes some pretty bold predictions.
But before we get started, we want to say a huge thank you to today's sponsor, the MCS, which define, maintain and improve quality by certifying products and installers so homeowners can have confidence in the low carbon technology they invest in. To find out more, head over to www.mcscertified.com, link below.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and please show your support by giving us a thumbs up.
Enjoy the interview.
Hi Graham, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I know that you're a very busy guy and you've got a lot of things going on. So we really appreciate you taking some time out to discuss renewables and heat pumps with us today. In 2010, you set up Freedom Heat Pumps. And I just wanted to ask you, how much has the industry changed over the course of that last 10 years? Are we where you expected us to be at this stage?
So when we originally set up Heat Pump Land was pretty strange. We were a small collection of people who were convinced we were geniuses and everybody else in heating had no idea what they were doing. So what we did, it was kind of throughout the industry, we sort of said, you all need to change to be like us and do everything the heat pump way. And I think about 6 months in, it dawned on us that we weren't going to make any money if we continued with that approach. What we did then is started to try and become more like the heating engineers who know what they're doing, and be more like boiler guys. Probably that's the biggest change in the sense that there has been a culture shift in us, our industry, to be more like the heating engineers. Does it look now like I thought it would be? I'll be honest, when I set this up, the plan was to make a killing in 18 months, buy a Lamborghini and go to a sandy beach somewhere and drink for the rest of my life. So now It's gone really badly.
So do you think that is the UK as a whole, has the adoption rate of heat pumps in homes has it been slower or faster than you anticipated when you first started?
That's a good question. I'm kind of quite happy with the adoption rate because it's been manageable. So if you compare our industry to solar, which kind of, we both went along side by side, there was an explosion in solar in 2012, 2013, and it went crazy, and then it died, and then it grew again, then it died. And we kind of watched from the sidelines in our heat pump universe with this sort of very steady growth year in, year out. There's been no peaks, there's been no troughs. It's just gently got bigger and bigger and bigger. So from a business side, really, really easy to manage because I didn't have to sack everyone one week and then employ them all another week later and so on. So I'm not surprised it's the size it is now. I think there's got to be some fairly major changes to get to the really, really big numbers that people are talking about. The market, depending on who you ask, currently 30,000-ish pieces a year. Boilers are 1 million pieces a year. So we're still a tiny, tiny piece. And I think we all as an industry need to have a bit of a think about how do we get that big quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the big number that's been thrown around is 600,000 heat pumps to be installed by 2028 per year. That is obviously quite a lot of units that need to be installed. Is the manpower and the competent manpower actually available to try and get towards that kind of number?
No, nowhere near. So bear in mind, our industry has bumbled along around the 30,000 pieces mark for the last 3 or 4 years. There's some really, really good installers, very well established, know what they're doing. And if you ask those guys, do you think another 1,000 installers can jump to your level quickly? The answer really is no. There's quite a lot to learn. There are significant differences between a heat pump and a boiler, slightly different skills and so on. I think myself, a slightly unfashionable view, that I think that the idea that we're going to train 1,000 installers to be as good as the installers who are out there now, it's not going to happen. What we need to do is make the installation of our technology similar in difficulty to putting a combi boiler in.
So could you just elaborate on that? So we've got oil boilers, gas boilers, and we've got air source heat pumps. What are the skill set differences that prevent an existing oil or gas boiler installer from just putting on an air source heat pump hat and going to install those?
Okay, that's kind of easy. So the first one is that if you go to your average, so the average house in the UK is a 1930s 3-bedroom semi-detached house. They're everywhere. Yeah, they're the houses we've got to get to numbers. If you are a combi installer, you drive up and say, yep, this is 120 meters squared, 24 kilowatt combi, done. That's the sizing done. As far as your radiators are concerned, as long as you oversize them, you're fine, because the boiler is so huge relating, it's 300% of the heat loss that you need. So it's like having a V8 car and driving it in town. You've got all that spare oomph. So as long as you put sort of fairly decent sized radiators and pipework in, you can just keep winding the boiler up until it does the job. So everybody criticizes the poor heating engineer and says he doesn't do a heat loss, he doesn't do any pipe sizing anymore. And the reason is he doesn't have to do that. So why bother working all the pipe sizes and radiator sizes out when it's kind of done for you? And also, if you went to B&Q or a merchant and you look at a combi boiler, it has everything in the box. So you buy a big white box, you screw it to the wall, you put your flue or chimney through the wall, connect up essentially fairly standard pipe sizes to your hot water and your radiators, and it just works. You don't buy a huge pile of parts and assemble it. I view heat pump land as kind of like a kit car. So a combi boiler is like buying a car from BMW. You turn up, it's assembled, they give you the keys, you drive it away. A heat pump kind of comes in a load of boxes, and they get us to assemble the unit, put pumps in, put valves in, put controls in, and so on. Nobody makes a heat pump in a box that you plonk on the floor, stick two tubes to, and connect it to your house. They're skills that are sort of lost by the heating industry because the technology made them no longer relevant. And so we've got to kind of drag everyone backwards, or we've got to drag the designers of heat pumps and go, lads, this is what a combi boiler looks like. Make me a complete system. That's what I rail against constantly on LinkedIn, saying, lads, we need to be like boilers, not make everyone like us. So I think if someone does develop a simple to install heat pump, we can then very, very quickly train thousands of gas installers to put them in.
It's interesting that you say that you feel that it needs to be simplified to be more accessible. Do you think that with regards to the installation of changing a house, especially with a retrofit and and putting in renewables, it needs to kind of be more of a all-encompassing package? So for example, maybe like solar panels, maybe an upgrade of the radiators, maybe even looking at insulation in that house, and then also the heat pump. And do you think that the industry and homeowners need more companies to step forward that have a all-encompassing turnkey offering? So for example, like when you go to a company and say you want a complete kitchen or bathroom fitted in, that company can offer you a plumber, an electrician, a plasterer. They come in, they all do the work. The carpenter puts everything together, the joiner, and you end up with this room that is fully functional. When with a heat pump, you can, as a consumer, as a homeowner, you tend to only kind of go to one company just for the heat pump, but nobody's then really come in and assessed your full installation and your radiators and all of those other things. Do you think that would make it more accessible to homeowners and make it easier for homeowners to adopt this technology?
Yes. So it's a really good point. The good installers, and there are many of them, that they kind of do that. We always say you're selling a quite expensive piece of kit to the homeowner. Homeowner's probably a professional, very busy. Great example is the first step of putting a heat pump in, you need an energy performance certificate. So I could say to you, I'll go and get an EPC done. And I always say to my installers, you get the EPC done, you bring the electrician in, you bring the plumber. Yeah, I'm a sort of typical customer, I guess, for an air source. I don't want the heating engineer to say, do you know any plumbers any sparkies? Can you get your own sparky in? It's kind of insane. So I think that's already happened. That sort of package deal is good. You hit on a really, really good point there, which again, it's kind of old-fashioned, but very much the way of thinking, which is it makes a lot of sense to insulate your house before changing to a heat pump.
Yeah.
Why would you put a heat pump in a disastrously insulated house? But people are perfectly happy to put a gas boiler into a badly installed house.
Yeah.
So, really, you should be saying, hey, if you are having anything done to your heating in any way, should we have a quick look at the insulation? And I've done some maths on this using the MCS maths. You can work out what the payback is on lagging and windows and so on. And it works. The insulation it really pays for itself. But people don't necessarily do it. And it's a hurdle. I always view everything as like a hurdle. Your boiler goes bang this afternoon. You are now sat there, you can't have a shower tomorrow. If you ring up a heat pump guy and he's going, we need to get the cavity wall insulation done on the loft, and you're going, I don't care, just get the shower working. And then the boiler guy goes, I can stick this on the wall tomorrow. And you go, I love a boiler. It's hard to fight against that.
Do you think that those are the biggest challenges that face homeowners is those concerns, or are there any other additional concerns that you hear when you're consulting and speaking to homeowners? For example, things like the general running costs moving forward, like, for example, electricity tariffs, those kind of things. Do the worries and the concerns extend past the installation? And how do you think the industry and the government can try and rebuild, or actually start building, that confidence in consumers? Because I think that without consumer confidence in this technology, we're just going to really continue to struggle moving forward and adopting at the especially at the rates that the government would like us to.
I always say that there's an amazing TV program. I think it was on the BBC or Netflix, and it was called White Gold. And it was basically a take on the double glazing industry in the 1980s. It was a comedy. It was brilliant. And when I was watching it, all I could think of was they're going to make this again in 20 years, but it's going to be about renewable.
Wow.
There is a whiff of the shyster in renewables, and a lot of it comes from the way they're sold. Let me give you an example, right? So I'm coming to your house and saying, here's a gas boiler. We're going to set light to some gas, which you understand, and we're going to heat up the water, and it's going to heat your house, and it's quite efficient. And you kind of get that. You've seen it on your gas hob or your barbecue. Makes sense. Then I turn up with my heat pump hat on. I say, essentially, I'm going to put a freezer in your back garden and I'm going to suck heat out of the garden while it's snowing.
Yes.
Which doesn't sound plausible. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to take that heat and I'm going to squeeze it and push it into water and then pump it around your house. And that's going to heat your house while it's snowing. On top of that, it's really, really efficient and green.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a pack of lies to me, and I know how it works.
Love it.
We get a bit obsessed with explaining to people how this technology works. And I was speaking with a manufacturer the other day, and he's writing all this stuff down. And I said to him, you're sat at your desk looking at this big black screen. I have one here. I'm sure you have one there. I have no idea how that black screen works, but I do know what it does. And I said, we as an industry have got to get past the how does it work. No one cares. No one knows how their car engine works. But you get in and go, this is a nice vehicle. I get it. So I think we as an industry have got to get past that and go, look, just really simple. It's just a freezer. It works like your freezer. Moving on, what does it do? It heats your house. Then talk about the benefits. I think we're too defensive. I go, oh no, it isn't rubbish, honestly. And we're all jumping in, oh, you're worried about the run cost. I get that. People are saying the run costs are high. A shyster has told them that unit's going to be free to run. And now the electricity bill's £1,000 a year. And actually, that's really, really simple. If you say to someone, you were paying £1,200 a year for gas, now look, you're paying an extra £1,000 a year for electricity. They kind of get that. For instance, if you have a gas bill, you pay £100 a month direct debit. So my gas bill is £100 a month. So my boiler costs £100 a month. It doesn't. It costs much more in the winter, much less in the summer. But you don't see that. The problem with electricity is the meter's very, very easy to read. To give you an idea, in my house, my heat pump uses 3 kilowatt hours a day in August, so 45p a day.
Wow.
So if I was a shyster, I'd go, wow, look at me, I'm heating the house for 45p a day.
Wow.
In January, it's costing me £200 a month, £5, £6, £7 a day. So depending on which school you sit in, you use the figures in January to slate heat pumps and you use the figures in August to sell them. And what we should do is be explaining to people that, no, it's just £100 a month direct debit. So you get people who go, they are awful, they cost a fortune. So most of them tend to work for boiler companies, I've found on LinkedIn. It's quite funny. I always say to them, look, you don't have to have one. If you really hate them, buy a boiler. All this kind of, there's no one going to be turning up outside the merchants, sort of shouting at you, going, why are you buying a boiler, you evil man? If you want to stick with that technology, stick with that technology. If you want to come with us, you'll come with us eventually. And I think that's the thing. Once it starts to roll, people talk about it with their neighbours and say, I've got a heat pump, it works, and so on. I think we'll be away.
The electricity tariffs, are they starting to concern you?
I'm going to struggle to come out of this not sounding like a bit of I won't say the word, but you can. So my total electricity bill per year is £800 a year. That's it, at 15p a kilowatt hour. Okay. And I fight my system and I tweak it with a laptop and I do everything I can to squeeze the last little drop out of it. My mortgage is nearly double that per month. And so if I just go and get a new mortgage deal, I can save significantly more money than my electricity. And as my wife likes to point out when I do my blog on a Sunday night, the maximum running cost my system gets to in January, when it's really cold, £6 or £7 a day, only for a very short number of days. But the bottle of wine that I drink when I'm doing the blog is a tenner.
Yeah.
And I fully appreciate that there are people in fuel poverty and so on, but in my life, there are other things I could do which financially would make a much more dramatic impact on our home income. So it doesn't bother me, and I do think that most of this kind of argument about renewables and so on could be solved if electricity was £1 a kilowatt hour. Because then you'd think about it. If your electricity bill was £1,000 a month, it would be right at the top of your agenda. But it's in most people, it's way down under the house insurance and so on. If you've got 2 mobile phones and a Sky dish, your entertainment package is more expensive than the heating.
So do you have a preferred air source heat pump brand or brands? Doesn't have to be one, it can be many. Is it and kind of why is that? Like which ones do you think that you've maybe installed or been part of the projects that you've worked on that you know that the success rate has been good, they've been reliable, they've been durable machines, and you yourself have faith in recommending to homeowners?
So I have a golden rule. I won't recommend a unit I haven't installed in my own house. Outside my little training room, I have the world's oldest Samsung heat pump. It was a prototype. I joke it's the Museum of Heat Pumpery. It's very dull. Don't detour off the motorway to see it. But so I had the very first Samsung. We started our business with Samsung. So we had the first one in the world. We installed it. I ran that in my house for 3 years because I wanted to say to my customers, it works in my house. Trust me, it'll be all right. And that really, really worked. So we were the guys who launched Samsung in Europe. As far as I'm concerned, there is no single manufacturer in the UK who covers every house. They all have their strengths, they have their weaknesses and so on. So Samsung are very strong in one area, whereas they might be weaker in another, which somebody else fits in with. So there are essentially 3 units that I love. So I'm a fan of Samsung just because I've always been there, and I probably know more about those units than anybody else, which is really sad claim, but it's probably true. The other one is that when we're looking at, so where we are in Hampshire, there's huge sections of the county where there's no gas, nothing, and it's all oil. So beautiful houses, oil, LPG. And we have a unit made by Hitachi, a high temperature unit, which is designed to fit straight into those houses. So
Wow.
you essentially chop the oil boiler out, put the high temperature unit in, turn it on and leave. Change nothing.
Wow.
Wow.
And that it's expensive. We call it the king, where it's basically astonishingly good at that one job. And it's what is lovely also is there's very, very little competition in that sector. So it's really easy to sell. It's expensive, but amazing. And of course, anyone who knows me from LinkedIn has probably heard of a company called Red,
Yeah.
Renewable Energy Devices. So the Red unit, in my opinion, is there's nothing like it. It is the most advanced unit. It's been put together by a guy who makes me look like a heat pump novice. He is a genius of heat pumps, and everything that the problem is all the things that are amazing about Red are kind of under the bonnet. So if you're a geek, you're in there going, oh wow,
that is so you.
yeah. So, and it's a bit like I always say to the guys, when you go to buy a car, most people go along and go, hey, they're nice seats, it's a nice color and it looks good. I'm the guy who's going, oh my God, tell me about the gearbox. Tell me about So that's what the Red unit does. And so Red, we use a lot in very, very large new build, 600 meters squared. So you're looking at sort of 8, 9, 10 bedrooms. It's very premium, very expensive. I am a huge fan of that, even to the extent that I now have a Red at home. Oh. But the problem is because I work in heat pumps, I haven't got any money. So my house is quite small. So the heat pump is miles too big for the house. But I don't care. It's amazing.
You live in a sauna and you're proud of it.
Yes, that's the problem. Is my wife has now found with this thing that you can wind it up and roast the house, which she loves. So yes, they're my three. I am very biased, but I always tell people they're the three I love most.
So with regards to those brands that you just mentioned, one of the things that we get asked an awful lot is how noisy is your heat? Is it really, really noisy? Ours is positioned
20 meters away from the house.
20 meters away, and we've built a log store around it. So ours is quite set away from the actual entrance of the house, and kind of operates, flows down the hill, so the fan goes away from us, so the noise kind of flows down the valley, but it's really not that noisy anyway.
But we are fortunate because we are in a rural environment, so we can set it away. I think that the concern about the noisiness of heat pumps are people living in towns.
Is that something that you also consider when you're looking at recommending any of those brands or any brand to a homeowner? And is that a legitimate concern from someone who's looking to buy one? Is how noisy is this thing going to be?
It is one of the key things. If you type heat pump in Google, it just comes up with noisy. Years ago, they were noisier. They're getting better. And in our industry, we love to spout about decibels, but it means nothing. Yeah. I have, how noisy is your house now? No idea in decibels. It's not something you can easily measure, and it has no reference. So to give you an idea, I have 2 units, almost identical, that we sell, which on paper are exactly the same noise. So they're both 55 decibels. But if you run the 2 of them, everyone agrees one is much quieter than the other. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that where the sound comes out of the unit, what frequencies and so on. This is all geekery that Mrs. Miggins, the homeowner, doesn't want to know. So I have this really stupid recommendation I do, which has really caught on. When people say to me, I'm really worried about having a heat pump at home, I'm worried about the noise and the neighbors, and you go, what, right? So first thing is, this thing is going to be on. If we get this right, this thing is going to turn on in the next few weeks, and it will probably be purring away constantly for 6 months. In November, it's going to be cracking away at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's what it does. It's different from a boiler. Right. And you're worried about the neighbours, understandably. First thing is, when this blooming thing's delivered, usually they're dirty, great beige boxes. For some reason, they have to be beige. It's like the law. And they have to be, and they look noisy as you're lifting them off the van. It's a great big thing. And I say to people, try this before you buy anything. Go home, get your microwave oven from the kitchen, take it outside and put it where the heat pump's going to go, and plug it in and turn it on. Because your heat pump makes the same noise as a microwave oven. And just turn it on. And if that keeps you awake, if that's too noisy, the neighbours moan and so on, don't buy a heat pump. If people think you're insane, the idea of carting the microwave around, but it really, really works. You kind of get that, the droney noise of you've heard your heat pump. It's very similar. So I always recommend to the sales guys that they wander around with a microwave in the back of the car and go, hey, this is what it sounds like. So I'm now on my 5th heat pump at home, and my next door neighbour's back door of their kitchen is 4.5 meters from my heat pump. I've changed it 5 times in 11 years, and he has never once asked me what is going on. He's deaf, but he...
I kind of felt like when we had our personal experience of buying a heat pump, and then subsequently afterwards, when we had people contact us and kind of ask us about our experience and ask us that, very valid questions like, how noisy is it? I'm really worried that this thing's going to be too noisy. And I kind of felt, for me personally, I just kind of kept on saying to Mars, it's really frustrating that heat pumps are not so mainstream that you can't just go to B&Q or Homebase or somewhere, walk down the heat pump aisle and see the machines and ask for a demo and ask for it to be switched on. And, that kind of experience as a consumer, you feel like you're going into the experience so blind. You're not, as you said, not really sure what's going to turn up once you've committed thousands of pounds to this, venture. And then this van turns up and you have no idea what's going to come out the back of the van and how big is it going to be. And I just feel like that is such a disconnect in the consumer experience. And it will be so nice when we get to that stage, for homeowners to be able to just feel like they have confidence from the get-go. They kind of know what they're buying into.
I agree. That's when day one, when we opened Freedom, we opened the showroom. We built a house in our warehouse, a sort of fake house, and we had a plant room with a heat pump in it. And it was probably the most successful thing we did in the whole 11 years was you can come and see a heat pump running and feel it and touch it. And so you've been told the radiators are going to be stone cold all the time. You turn up in my showroom and you go, wow, that feels lovely. Lovely and warm. You go, yep, that can be done. I would say 95% of people say, do you know what? The noise wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
They all say, why do they have to be so horribly ugly? And I would say, well, that is rule 1 of renewables, is you're not allowed to make them pretty. That sort of showroom thing, obviously very difficult for a little installer to do, one-man bands to do, but that it's coming. And I think, like the merchants have a bathroom showroom. Possibly they'll have a heat pump showroom in time. But I completely get what you're saying. I mean, would you buy a £20,000 car off the internet without ever seeing one? No. You'd at least see one in the car park at Tesco. So same with the heat pump. You'd like to at least brush past the thing.
We mentioned quite a lot of concerns that homeowners obviously have about heat pumps. I think one of the biggest ones comes down to price, and that's both for the unit and the installation. Do you foresee in the near future that those prices are going to start coming down a little bit, making it a little bit more easier for people to actually afford them?
I hold, again, a slightly unpopular view on this. I can tell you the day the prices are going to drop. 1st of April 2022, the day after the RHI changes.
Right.
People say, why? Look at solar. We have to be honest. Solar was very, very expensive. Then the tariff dropped. And the day after, solar became very, very cheap. When you speak to manufacturers, and I've said this to everyone who will listen to me, we are all aware that the RHI, the government grant, is changing in March, April next year. Nobody knows where it's going to be. There's a lot of talk about 7,000 quid and so on, but it's not been signed off. Nobody thinks it's going up. So let's assume it drops to £7,000. There's a fairly simple piece of maths you need to do. You could have had a boiler put in your house for £3,000 by a heating engineer. So that's the benchmark. So the heat pump has got to be equivalent of £3,000 plus the total grant from the government. That means 10 grand. We as an industry have got to work out, how can I get a unit in your house for 10 grand? Because at the moment, some people are doing it for 10 grand, but others 12, 13, 14. So we've all got to look. And I keep saying to everyone, me as a distributor, I've got to take a little bit of a whack. My manufacturers have got to take a whack. The installers have got to take a whack. So I've already started the process of what pieces of the unit do you no longer need. Most of the people, when you ask them, I'm sure this isn't true, when you ask them face to face, they say, no, this will never change. The price is the price. And you go, the Chinese will make me a heat pump for a lot less money. I have, seen prices from China and you think, wow, that's incredible. If that becomes the only economical way of doing it, then the rest will follow. So yes, I think the biggest change will come in the cost of the kit. I think that two things will happen. One is the kit cost will drop, plus the manufacturers have got to start thinking about how can I make my box cheaper to install than the next guy's box.
When the temperatures are outside in autumn, kind of 7 degrees, 6 degrees, the efficiency is fantastic. You start hitting 5, 4, 3, and you start to see that efficiency start to drop a lot. Are any manufacturers actually working on heat pumps that are going to make these units far more efficient when you start hitting, the temperatures around 0 and below?
Obviously, that's the aim. Everybody wants efficiency. Everyone wants to make them more and more efficient. Unfortunately, there are essentially about 3 laws that were written that cannot be broken. The scientists cannot break the 3 laws of thermodynamics. Yeah. And despite what people say, technology, and you just can't break them. There is only so much efficiency you can squeeze when it's -2 or -1 out of the air. Or the ground or whatever. So in the end, I call it the lift. You are paying with your heat pump for the difference between the coldest bit of the system and the hottest bit of the system. Daylight today, it's 19 degrees where I am. So my unit would be running at somewhere of the order of 10, 11 degrees. So the coldest bit is 10, 11 degrees. And the warmest bit, my radiators, I might run at 40 degrees today. So I'm only lifting the temperature 25, 30 degrees. Nice and easy. Efficiency is amazing. It's like cruising down the road, at 40 miles an hour. Once it starts snowing, I've got to run my unit at -20 outside, and I've got to run my indoors at 50. So I'm lifting 70 degrees, and that is just more expensive. So now I'm doing 100 miles an hour in my machine. And no matter what you do, you can't solve that unless you can find some heat from somewhere else. There's a lot of marketing talk about this, but the back end, all of us who know any of the science go, yeah, that's never going to happen. There are formulas where you can work it out. So I think we will get slightly more efficient with time. The problem is you can't have everything, right? So you have a heat pump, but you know how big it is. The reason it's the size it is because we've got to move a lot of air through it. So I always say to people, I have a 16 kilowatt heat pump. My unit is big. It's 1.2 meters high, 1 meter wide, probably similar to yours with 2 big fans and so on. And that has a 16 kilowatt radiator on the back. I have a motorbike which gives 150 kilowatts, and the radiator is this big, but no one cares about the noise. So you can't have small unless you want noisy. If you go big, you can have greater efficiency, but who wants a huge unit in the back garden? So yeah, we could get the efficiency better by making the unit massive or moving more air. So you can have noisy and efficient, big and efficient, but you can't have small, quiet and efficient. Those 3 don't go together.
So just talking about system design now for a minute. The one thing that we consistently see is that there's a lot of corners that get cut from certain installers. Well, I'll say some installers cut corners. And one of those areas typically where they tend not to recommend is upsizing of radiators when they actually should. And we can only speak from our experience where we had a couple of rooms that struggled to come to temperature. We put a couple of K3s in those rooms and now they are toasty. They're probably the warmest rooms in the house. From a heat emitter and design perspective, how important is it that you actually size radiators correctly?
It's very important. But the thing, just stepping back a couple of points. So if you have a combi boiler, it's a V8, right? So it's set up at 60 degrees, let's say. If those 2 rooms are being cold, you just wind the boiler up to 70 degrees and now they're done. We could do that in heat pumps. It's possible to do, but the run cost starts to really run away with you as you raise the temperature. So what's really sensible to do is to try and match your radiator to the room size, as small as possible, but big enough to do the job. MCS, for all of its faults, so MCS is essentially, if you will, it's they're the gatekeepers to the grant. That's the way I talk about them. They have a process that says, I must work out your heat loss of your lounge. I must recommend you a radiator that will do the job. There is a lot of rubbish talked about radiators. So the first thing is you do not need special radiators. Mine were bought in screw fix. They're just rads. They're just bigger. So that's the first thing. So you don't need anything fancy. If you want fancy, fill your boots, it's your money. Getting the size right is really key. Getting the pipes big enough to feed the radiators is really key. But you can do microbore if you know what you're doing. The odds that I'm going to come round to your 1930s combi-fired house, chop the heat pump off, chop the boiler off, stick a heat pump on, turn it on, and the rads will be perfect, slim.
Mm-hmm.
It's unlikely. But again, I'm famous for my stupid ideas in heat pumps. I always say to people, if you're even considering this technology, why don't you go home today, go to your boiler and set it to 50 degrees C, right? Do it yourself. Make a pencil mark where it was, but move it to 50 degrees C. Turn it on 24 hours a day and run it. And go through this winter at 50 degrees C and see if it's big enough. And if there are rooms that are cold, when you have your heat pump, those rooms are going to need radiators. I had to change a few rads in my house, not all of them, change a few because they weren't big enough for the job. Very similar problem to you. But yeah, if anyone comes around your house and says, we're just going to sling this unit on and it's going to work, get them out the door. There are, as I mentioned right at the beginning of this interview, the very, very high temperature units you can do that with because they run at the same temperature. But it's crazy to buy a very high temperature unit if you're changing the radiators already. They're the choice. You know, when you go into people's houses, they've got this beautiful Victorian cast iron rads.
Mm-hmm.
That they're £1,000 each. People are not going to change them. So that's when you use these very high temperature units. But if you've got a B&Q white rad, get it out, put a new one in.
That's really interesting that you say that. And so for us, we are air to water. So that means that our heat pump is creating that hot air and blowing it into the house and warming up our water, and the hot water runs through our radiators. There was also obviously air to air, which sounds really interesting, and ground source. How do you feel those compare? And would you consider putting in, for example, air to air? I think that what's so intriguing about air to air, well, not intriguing because it's not really a miracle or anything, but I think what's so interesting about it is obviously when it is air to air, you can then switch it to cool and to warm. And as we kind of start to see more of these extreme climates coming in, and we start to get these really high spiking hot summers and then these really cold winters, it would be really nice to think that at some stage in the future, homeowners start to have a little bit more choice with regards to cooling their house as well as warming their house as well. So how do you feel about air to air compared to air to water?
Well, to be honest, I'm a liar. I'm not really a heat pump guy. I'm really a fridge engineer. So an air conditioning engineer, that's what I was trained as. And I remember back in the 90s, everyone said the next big thing is domestic air conditioning. And every year it's coming. It never has. But here's it's a real interesting point, especially for your viewers, is when you go to a hotel, it's heated and cooled by air to air. There is no water anywhere. When you go to the Far East, so I spend a fair bit of time in Korea and whatever, because that's where my manufacturers are. The Koreans look at you like you've got two heads when you say to them, I'm going to take the heat out of the air, put it into water and pump it around a hose pipe that an idiot has buried in my lounge. And that's going to heat my house. They go, why don't you just heat the air? Well, because in the 70s, there used to be these really noisy air boilers and everyone hated them. And we haven't got over the fact that technology's moved on in 50 years. So people come from their office, which is air conditioned and heated with air conditioning, to a house with a blooming hose pipe buried in the lounge. When they talk about 600,000 heat pumps in the UK, I reckon 400,000 of them are going to be air conditioning. What I'd do. Because if you think about it, exactly your point, you can cool. A lot of people will leap up and down and go, cooling's bad, it's unnecessary burning of fossil fuels. And you go, just think a second. Your cooling is on when the sun's shining. So all of the electricity is coming from the solar. Your cooling could be free. Your heating will never be free because solar panels don't work in November in the middle of the night when your heat pump's flat out. But your cooling, you can really offset quite nicely. And also the grid is producing like the clappers in that hot weather. So it's quite a nice balance. So I think that aircon will become much, much more popular. Ground source is amazing. I mean, so just in case people don't know what the difference is, the technology I specialize in, we suck the heat out of the air in the garden. So if it's snowing, the air is very, very cold. And we talked about the lift already, so it's expensive to lift it up. But if you dig into your garden a metre or two down into the soil, the temperature is 12 degrees all the time. So while it's snowing, your ground's at 12 degrees. So a ground source will always be more efficient because the coldest bit isn't as cold as the air. The problem is you do need to dig up the back garden. You can't just throw, 15 meters of hose pipe under a pile of sand and hope it'll work. There is a lot of pipe work in the ground. You can use boreholes, but they tend to be expensive. Ground source tends to lend itself towards much larger properties with very big heat loads, listed properties where people don't want to see anything outside. I don't see ground source ever being the sort of thing you'll put in your 3-bedroom semi just because the garden isn't big enough.
So where do you see the easy gains being in heat pumps?
So I think if you want to get lots of heat pumps stuck in quickly into people's houses, we've got to get over one massive hurdle, which I call temperature anxiety. So think range anxiety in an electric car. The biggest anxiety for heat pumps is that I'm trying to sell you a unit that doesn't run as hot as your boiler. And all the associated problems with radiators, pipes, and so on. If I can sell you a box, which you can put outside your house, you can disconnect your gas boiler, push the tubes through the wall and connect it to this box outside, and it can reuse all of the radiators, the pipes, the hot water cylinder, the whole system. So it's a nice, simple changeover. Then I now have your box, which is a really good competitor for a boiler. The installation is very simple. And that technology exists. So there are heat pumps now available, monoblock heat pumps, all-in-one heat pumps, using a refrigerant which we in the trade call R290, but you call it propane, the stuff you drive your barbecue off. There is a lot of resistance to this refrigerant because, of course, it burns, but if it's outside, it's safe, just like your barbecue is safe outside. So these R290 machines are coming, and they all run at 65, 70 degrees C. So our industry is a little bit resistant to them. And the main resistance is because we, the old guard, have for years told you need to push the radiator temperature down to get the efficiency. If you run them hot, the efficiency is worse, the run cost is worse. But somebody said to me recently, it was kind of a real weird, life-changing moment. They said, does efficiency matter if the electricity produced is renewable? So I think the big change will be so-called ultra-high temperature heat pumps. I think the first heat pump you'll have will be that machine. We will then teach you to turn it down and down and down and increase the efficiency. And the next heat pump you'll buy in 15 years' time will be 50 degrees C.
Wow. Okay. That's an interesting prediction.
Cool. Yeah.
That will make me very, very unpopular if you tell everyone.
Oh, it's too late now.
Prepare for the comments.
Well, I think that's just been fantastic. I've learned so much. It's been a fun interview. So thank you so much for your time, Graham.
Thank you, Graham.
What about your blog? You mentioned you've got a blog and you do it on a Sunday night. So does it come out on a Sunday night, or are you just sitting there with your glass of wine just typing away on a Sunday night?
To be honest, I've blogged for years on various subjects. And I just like doing it. And during lockdown, I started doing it quite a bit because I had a lot of time. And essentially, all I'm doing is I'm writing a training course and giving little bits of the course each week. And I've got this really romantic idea that I'm going to write an incredibly dull book on heat pumps and my life in them. And I was going to call it Cold and Wet, My Life in Heat Pumps. That's my blog. So my blog is really a book that one day I will put together. And to be honest, I did it for a laugh and it's gone really, really well. The scariest thing is that, I could be anybody. I'm just writing rubbish every Sunday night. And people now think I'm an expert. And I'm not an expert. I'm a guy who writes a blog.
No, that's not true. You've got a lot of years of experience.
A lot of knowledge.
I
mean, so if anybody wants to read this blog, I think is the simplest way to just go onto LinkedIn and search for Graham Hendra.
Yeah, that's the easiest thing.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for your time, Graham. It's been a real pleasure having you on, and I think we're going to have to do a follow-up interview with you at some stage and hold you accountable for some of these predictions, and maybe even go through some of the feedback comments that we get.
I think so. I think there'll be a few.
Yeah, I'm sure there will. But yeah, I'm obviously always happy to help. It's been a real pleasure for me too. It's really nice to chat away. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank
Thanks
you,
very
Graham.
much. Thanks, Graham.